Over to you, Sherry.
Thanks, Alistair. Warm greetings from Arlington, Virginia. My name is Sherry Mueller, and it's my privilege to serve as the president of the Public Diplomacy Council. It's also my privilege to welcome each and every one of you to this webinar, this first Monday forum featuring Dr. Allan Goodman, the CEO of the Institute of International Education. It's a special pleasure to open this session because I spent 18 years of my career at the Institute of International Education and am always in awe of how, Allan, under your leadership, you honor the incredible history and heritage of IIE and also keep it on the cutting edge of the field of international education. We are joined in co-hosting this event. There are three co-sponsors: the USC Annenberg Center for Communication, Leadership and Policy, the Public Diplomacy Association of America, and the Public Diplomacy Council. And the latter two organizations will soon be the Public Diplomacy Council of America. I want to say a very special thanks to our PDC Rising Professional, tech host, Alistair Somerville. His backup tech host today is PDC graduate fellow Marcy Falk-Bados, the Hans Tom Tuck graduate fellow. They remind me to ask you to please put your questions in the Q&A box and be sure to note your name and your affiliation. If you have any tech issues, please contact them via the chat box, and they will do their very best to resolve those as quickly as possible. There are more than 120 people registered for today, and it's very exciting to be part of this first Monday forum. To introduce Dr. Goodman, let me introduce Dr. Kyle Long. He's a PDC member beyond the Beltway, living in Chicago, working at Northwestern University, but still finding time to teach courses at George Washington University, graduate courses. His own PhD is in comparative and international education from Columbia, and his most recent book is The Emergence of the American University Abroad. He is also serving as vice president of the American University of Iraq Foundation. And I'm very happy to welcome some of his students as well to this first Monday forum. Kyle, the microphone is yours.
Hello all, cold greetings from the Windy City. Thank you, Sherry, for these kind words and the privilege to introduce Dr. Allan E. Goodman, a man who, as the saying goes, needs no introduction, especially among the public diplomacy crowd. That's because Allan has been a luminary in this field for decades. His sterling career has included service in government and academia, but we know him best as the 6th president of the Institute of International Education, a post he's held for nearly 24 years. Now, for over a century, IIE has been the world's leading organization for international education through its research, programs, and advocacy, among other efforts. And during Allan's tenure, international education became a worldwide sensation. When he first arrived at IIE in 1998, there were approximately 2 million international students worldwide. In 2020, there were 5.6 million. So international education has, during that time, become a global imperative for individuals, for institutions, and for nations. And under Allan's leadership, IIE has supplemented hallmarks like Fulbright and Open Doors with life-saving programs like the Scholar Rescue Fund and boundary-expanding research initiatives like Project Atlas. Allan has taught generations of administration officials, congresspersons, and foreign policy professionals about the significance of international education to America's national interests. His lessons have ranged from the linkages between foreign language study and national security, between international student mobility and economic competitiveness, between educating refugees and moral authority on the world stage. He is undoubtedly America's international educator in chief. Another way to describe Allan is Renaissance man. In addition to his work on education, he is a recognized scholar of foreign affairs, diplomacy, national security, and intelligence. His academic interests, no doubt cultivated as an undergraduate at Northwestern, reflect the liberal education America is prized for. As a young academic, he studied everything from Vietnamese immigration patterns to diplomatic procedures in the event of the discovery of extraterrestrial life. But Allan has long been keen on communicating beyond the halls of academia. When someone can address non-specialist audiences on matters of broad public concern, we call that person a public intellectual. And the stock in trade of a public intellectual is prediction. And let me tell you, Allan has a knack for forecasting. Nearly 30 years ago, he wrote a book, A Brief History of the Future, the United States in a Changing World Order, that shows us that not only can we do prediction, he gives us the tools to do it. Just as it is possible for the professional historian to infer from incomplete records why people acted the way they did in the past, he wrote in the introduction, I think it is possible to infer how they will act in the future, as long as we are clear about the ideas that give rise to such action. He then set for himself the task to, quote, identify the ideas that are changing the map of the modern world and how they will surprise us in shaping the international system. Now, you can draw a straight line from there to today's presentation, in which Allan will use historical data on international education to sketch out possibilities for the future. Now, scholars who evaluate forecasters sometimes refer to them as foxes or hedgehogs. Foxes know many little things. They are not necessarily experts in one particular field, but they do have sufficient knowledge in multiple fields, which enables them to make important connections and therefore good predictions. Hedgehogs, on the other hand, know one big thing. They see the world through a single lens. This makes them really good storytellers because they are more likely than foxes to say something definitely will or won't happen. But it doesn't necessarily make them better at predicting the future. In fact, research shows that when hedgehogs make forecasts on the subjects they know most about, their accuracy actually declines. Which begs the question, is Allan Goodman a fox or a hedgehog? Does he know many little things or one big thing? Fortunately for us, Allan is in fact that rare person who knows many big things. And I'm eager to hear what he has to say today. The floor is yours, Dr. Goodman.
Kyle, thank you very much, and thank you for your splendid book. I wish there were more American universities and colleges all over the world like the one you helped to found in Iraq, and it would be America's gift to the world to have many more of the kind you are associated with. And I guess I have two fundamental rules about forecasting. One is if Sherry Mueller asks you to do something, you always have to say yes. And you have to hope that Kyle Long will be your introducer. So I was having a really good time listening to you. And then I realized I actually have to sing for my supper. So I appreciate the introduction and the invitation very much. I'm broadcasting from my home in Northwest Washington. I'm glad I'm not doing this in New York City at our new headquarters at the World Trade Center, because it's still illegal in the state of New York to forecast the future. And even though we've seen a rash of psychics and palm readers and astrologers put up shop signs, it's still a violation of the New York State Criminal Code. So I feel fortunate that I can do this safely from Washington rather than our New York headquarters. So And I also want to congratulate the evolution of the Public Diplomacy Council, and it's growing together because you are really bringing the association and the council as a very powerful force in our field, but connecting so many Americans across the country to the value of public diplomacy. It can't just be done on a webinar, and it can't just be done from Washington. And I think the Public Diplomacy Council and the American Association now being close together will make it more and more possible for people to appreciate how essential what everyone on this call is doing is to diplomacy and to the future of our international relationships. I'm also maybe mindful of history. We do have 100 years of open doors data, actually 102 years of open doors data of the flow of students to the United States. It's an accident of history, really, that we collected the data because in 1920, the United States did not have non-immigrant visas. It was not possible if you were a student from Europe or a professor from Europe to come to the United States on any other terms than intending to immigrate. And we quickly learned, the first president of IIE quickly learned that there were scores of students and professors on Ellis Island who were told, based on their nationality, that they might have to stay there 3 or 4 years before their quota number came up. And so the US needed a system to visa people into the United States, not intending to immigrate, but who were here as visiting scholars, visiting researchers, and international students. And we were able to work out an arrangement with the then Commissioner of Immigration that every scholar or student coming into the United States would be paroled into our custody. They would place a bond of cash in an envelope in the Institute safe, and they would retrieve the cash when they left. And our requirement for the immigration system was to do a census of how many international students came, where they came from, where they were going in the US, and also when they left the United States. And it was a system that lasted until 1952. I have no idea how big the bonds were. I have no idea how much money we collected. But I know within a few years of starting the system, we had grown from about 6,000 international students to nearly 20,000. And there's been pretty much straight line, steady growth through all of this period that we can document. The other thing that's interesting about 102 years of data is we had 12 pandemics in the middle of that data stream. And so we're able to look at what happens when there is a pandemic and what happens afterwards. And interestingly for us, during the previous 11 pandemics, there were international educational exchanges ongoing and underway, just as there are and have been ever since COVID-19 was declared a pandemic. So we know from the past that exchanges occur during pandemics, but we also know when they're declared over, or in some pandemics don't end really, or they're controlled, that there is a surge in international student mobility, especially to the United States. And I think that that's the dynamic that we're going to see. We've already seen the continuation of international educational exchanges while the pandemic has been underway. And we're already seeing a rise in applications for programs, a substantial rise in applications for exchange programs like Fulbright, which we administer on behalf of the Department of State. And I think the real surge we have to get ready for as international educators is the pent-up demand of students and scholars from everywhere to be internationally mobile once it's a little bit safer to do so. Focusing on what's ahead, really want to suggest three observations. One is, I think the future for international student mobility and educational exchange is extraordinarily bright. Kyle mentioned that we have about 5.5 million internationally mobile students. I believe that number will double by the end of this decade. And when you think about it, there are more young people than ever before. There are more young people accessing higher education. And there's actually only a limited number of places where they can go, like the United States. And so there's going to be, I think, a tremendous increase in that both the age cohort ready for higher education and their interest in going to the countries, the regions that have the capacity to host them. So I think there'll be a surge. And I think we've also learned something very important from our students during the pandemic, which is they know how to cope. We know how to evacuate them, we know how to repatriate them, but more importantly, they knew how to cope through the early stages of this pandemic, knew how to take the best of what they could from their experience and get ready for the next experience that they're going to have. I was struck recently meeting a Goodman scholarship alumna from the University of California at Davis. And she had a very interesting study abroad experience. She went to a country where almost nothing happened. And in her 3 months there was an earthquake, a social revolution, an election, and the pandemic. And I said, gee, I wonder if you'll ever study abroad again. And she said, me? I'm the perfect person to do it. I'm going to apply for a Fulbright next because I know what to do when there is an earthquake, when there's a social revolution, when there is an election, and when there is a pandemic. And she was ready for the future. And I think we have a generation of students in study abroad and internationally mobile students that are going to enter this next period with that outlook. The second observation I'd make is America in particular is going to have a lot of competition. Even before the pandemic, there were over a dozen countries that had declared as part of their foreign policy that their intent was to double the number of international students in their countries by the end of the decade. All of them have reaffirmed their commitment to do that as we approach the either end or the beginning of the possibility of controlling this pandemic. Some are on complete track to achieve that objective. Some are going to be close, but it means there are more countries, and not only English-speaking countries, than ever before that are going to be available for international students. But more importantly, as part of national foreign policies and strategic plans, there's going to be greater competition for the talent and the capabilities that we know international students have. So I think this will be a decade of both enormous growth, the surge that I talked about, but also enormous competition between a dozen to 15 countries that see, as we do, the value and importance of international educational exchange and student mobility. We're also going to see more regions be more appealing to international students. I was recently doing a webinar for Taiwan, and I began looking at the top universities in the top 100 list. And I said, if I were a student on Taiwan and wanted to go to a top 100 university, how many would be available to me within a 3-hour air flight? Turned out the number was 21. And if you look at the league tables and the rankings of international universities that are in the top 100, the top 200. More and more of them are outside of North America, and more of them will appeal to students who want to be a bit closer to home. I don't think geography and being closer to home is going to deter people necessarily from intercontinental, international student mobility or coming to the United States. In the pandemic, evacuations and repatriation challenges we faced, it turned out that it really didn't matter if you were in the early 6 months, 8 months, 9 months. It didn't really matter if you were 3 hours from home or 12, because air travel was severely disrupted. Most borders were closed, and no matter how close or how far you were from home, you weren't going to get there. In fact, some of the hardest repatriations we had were getting students from the United States to their home in the Caribbean, simply because there was no air service or the borders were closed. Or we're getting students from Africa who were ready to go back home. We could get them to Addis, we could get them to Johannesburg, but from there we couldn't get them to the regional flights because there were none to the countries that were home. So it may weigh heavily on people's minds that they need to be and want to be closer to home, and it also may make no difference. What will make a difference is how open universities and university systems and countries are to hosting international students. And that brings me to the importance of the university system. Talked about the importance of countries seeking as part of foreign policy to have more international students. Talked about the importance of regions that seem to be growing rapidly into the top ranks of the league tables. And there are also university systems which have foreign policies and have very intentional foreign policies to recruit more international students, to be more open to international students than ever before. And since the Super Bowl is coming up, I thought I'd remind us all of the Will Ferrell commercial for General Motors. GM is, like most automobile manufacturers, now committed to electric vehicles. What so disturbed Will in the commercial was that Norway appeared to be out EVing the United States. And Will Ferrell wanted to travel to Norway to tell them that we're better than you are. And he did. In the commercial, if some of you recall it, he thought he was in Norway, but he actually had landed in Sweden. So Norway produced a commercial. And Marcy, if you could, I'd appreciate very much if you would show the Norway commercial, and then I'll come back to my point about it.
Damn it! Holy mackerel. Olaf!
This just arrived for you. It smells like fishy.
I don't care. The Americans are coming, and Will Ferrell does not look happy.
What do we do?
We have to make a public apology, and we have to get rid of anything else that might make Will envy us in any way. If he gets so annoyed about our electric vehicles, I can't imagine how he'll react to all the other stuff.
All right, action.
Dear Mr. Ferrell, dear General Motors, on behalf of our university and the rest of Norway, we are truly sorry. We want to maintain a strong and sound relationship with the United States. And of course, we shouldn't have become the leading country in the world when it comes to electrical vehicles without checking with you first. And we fully understand that you want to punch us in the face. But our collaboration with you is of utmost importance. Our student exchange, for instance.
I pay tuition.
Again,
I pay tuition?
one more time.
I pay tuition.
Good.
But I don't pay tuition. Education in Norway is free, even for us Americans.
Well, I know that, but Will Ferrell does not have to know. We also hope that we can continue our extensive research collaboration with many American universities. We collaborate, for instance, with the University of
Good afternoon, Rector. I was hoping I could talk to you about our battery research. You know that project that uses clean, renewable hydropower to recycle and reuse batteries from electric vehicles?
Okay, but we'll have to talk about this later. This is really not a good time.
Okay.
What we're trying to say is that if you want
See
to
you at the opening of the battery factory then.
Yes. What we're trying to say is that if you want to become the #1 country in the world when it comes to electrical vehicles, we won't stand in your way. We'll even help you and co-create the knowledge you need. Excuse me. Hello?
Hi, Rector. I just wanted to say goodbye, and then I'll see you next year. I'm off for my 1-year paid maternity leave.
Sorry about that.
Not sorry.
So that was the rector of Agder University in Norway. Of course, tuition is free for Norwegian students and American students. And we've been working with Norway for almost a decade now to see why so few American students beyond those who have relatives in Norway actually take advantage of it. I think the university systems that are either low cost or free to international students will become more prominent in this decade. Most of them now teach in English, as Norway does, making it possible for more and more students who want to have both the abroad experience and one that's affordable, able to do so. Norway, when we started, was at about 600 Americans studying abroad there. The goal was to reach 1,000. They're not there yet, but they have an attitude, system, and building an alumni base that I think will make it possible for more and more students to consider options outside the United States, both for undergraduate and graduate degrees at low or no cost in terms of tuition. So in the field we're in the country that we're in, we're going to face competition on a number of fronts. But we're also going to face a growing population of students that no single country, no matter how big, can accommodate. And I think that's why the future of international educational exchange is extremely bright, why it will be a matter of foreign policy in many more countries, and it will be about the best investment any country or person can make in making the world we share a less dangerous place. With that, Kyle and Sherry, I'm very happy to take questions from the audience and appreciate very much the work the council does, and I'm greatly honored that you had me here for your Monday forum.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Goodman. That was a tour de force, really, of the issues in international education at the moment. And as a former international student on an F1 visa myself, that was an interesting history of the immigration background to some of the issues we're facing today. We have quite a few questions coming in from members of the audience, and encourage people to type their questions into the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen.
Yes, great, thank you.
Thank you. And the first question here is from Barbara Keller. And you might have seen that last week, the State Department announced it was canceling the Fulbright student program for Afghan students for the 2022 to 2023 academic year. What are your views on this decision? And more broadly, what are your views on Fulbright opportunities being resumed for students in countries that are currently closed to Fulbrighters? In looking at the bigger picture, is closing off countries a good idea?
I think the State Department explained its decision based on safety and security concerns of the semifinalists. And I think we have to respect that. There will be places where it will not be possible to interview people or possible for them to leave their countries safely to come to the United States. But Fulbright does everything it can to keep international exchanges going every place that it possibly can, as long as it's safe. And that, I think that's in the DNA of the State Department. It's in the DNA of Bureau of Education and Cultural Affairs. And we were very, very inspired all through the pandemic at how hard the Bureau worked to make sure where exchanges could happen, they did. Where exchanges could be facilitated, they were. And I think that'll continue to be part of the public diplomacy DNA of the Bureau of Education and Cultural Affairs.
And then another related question from Ambassador Greta Morris, sort of looking at the other side of the Afghanistan fallout. Does IIE have any plans to assist Afghan refugees with higher education to prepare them for successful lives in the US and enable them to help Afghans still in their own country when that becomes possible?
Yes, we do. We've launched a new initiative called the Odyssey Scholarships, which are earmarked, privately funded, and earmarked only for refugee and displaced students. And the idea is that it's the group among refugee and displaced that nobody addresses, because there's so many other pressing needs of refugees. And most people don't realize that there are many people who are displaced or who are refugees or had started a university education or finished a university education and are ready for graduate education. And we named it Odyssey because Odysseus, he was displaced, he was a refugee, but he never lost the idea of coming back home. And so many of the refugee students we work with, they want to go back home. They want to build back better when they get the chance to go back home. And we think giving these full scholarships will make it possible for them, both undergrads and graduates, to complete whole degrees and return home and also study nearby where they are. So in our global network of universities and partners, we have found on every continent universities that will take refugee students, and may not mean then that the refugee student has to have a passport or has to have a visa or has to cross a border. There are enough universities around the world able and willing to take these students, and I think our funding helps. So the aim is to help as many as we can, and it'll never be enough, but at least this message is that this scholarship is only for you, and it eliminates the worry if would I qualify, have a complication by not having travel papers, would I have to leave the home community where my family is. We're going to figure out ways so that this is not an obstacle for refugee and displaced students.
On a different topic, there are a couple of questions. One is also from Greta Morris. Another question from Daniela Suarez, who's a PDC Rising Professional member and a graduate student at American University School of International Service, talking about countries where relations are strained at the moment, certainly with the US, specifically China, and also Russia as well. And given what we're seeing in the world with the Winter Olympics at the moment, and of course the tensions in Eastern Europe, I think these are very timely questions about how you see the future of exchange. I think the questions are talking about specifically between the US and China and the US and Russia. So perhaps you could comment on that.
The neat thing about Fulbright and also educational exchanges beyond that, and I apologize for the noise in the background, it is that these exchanges have been possible. It's easy to have them happen in times of détente and cordial relations. They've been happening all through the Cold War, all through conflicts and tensions between societies. And I think it's the genius of American foreign policy to continue to support these kinds of activities and realize that that you can have exchanges in all kinds of weather, facing all kinds of challenges. It doesn't immediately guarantee that there will be peace. It doesn't immediately guarantee that tensions will end. But it does give people the chance to get to know each other in their systems in ways that pay dividends for many, many years thereafter. So I think we are a vital, that is to say, international exchanges like Fulbright are so vital to keeping hope alive that tensions will reduce, that understanding will increase. And so many universities and students around the world are willing to accept that, even if they disagree with our policies.
There's been several questions looking more at US universities at the moment and how they're coping with the pandemic, of course, and then preparing for what is hopefully going to be a sort of resurgence in the next few years. One of those questions is from Glenn Shive, who's dialing in from Scotland. And he asks, what have you observed in US universities that are currently in lean years of international exchange, but are positioning themselves well to respond to the coming surge after the pandemic recedes? So what, I guess, some success stories or universities you've seen that are preparing themselves well.
Glenn, thank you. Good to be in touch, and thank you for the question. Actually, I have no bad stories. What the pandemic showed was that most of our colleges and universities want international students. They realize the benefits of having classrooms, virtual or otherwise, filled with not just students of a particular socioeconomic class, a particular country, a particular region. The fact that this was threatened by the pandemic made the role of the senior internationalization officer in most campuses more important. I've talked to many who said that in 3 months they spent more time with the president of the university than the preceding 3 years, because presidents, boards of trustees, faculty get the importance of an internationally mobile and diverse student body in class and out of class. I think we also learned that international students are ready to be quarantined if that needs to be the case. They're able to follow health protocols and are the first to line up to get vaccinations when they were available. So I think it's taught us a lot about the university as an ecosystem, that in these kinds of difficult situations are ready to step up. It would have been easy to close universities and say, everybody go home. But the senior internationalization officer said, wait a minute, international students can't go home. There's no air service. Their borders are closed. And so immediately, dormitories, food service pivoted to realize that they are going to have international students with them who can't go back home, who don't have summer jobs because they can't go back home, but made these kinds of accommodations. And every state, public or private, every college we're aware of made those accommodations. And I think people will remember for the future how we cared for international students when they were here. And it's one of the hallmarks of our duty of care and good stewardship at universities and colleges that host international students.
Well, that was certainly my experience as an international student at Georgetown. And I think the Office of Global Services, where our colleagues working on international student issues are based, certainly became very, very important. Not that they weren't important before, but in those months early in the pandemic. And it was really good to see the school mobilizing when there were some efforts by the administration to place certain limits during the pandemic on international students. It was quite heartening to see as an international student. So I could definitely echo that. And we have a related question from Kiara Hoyne, who I think is one of Dr. Long's students at GW. She asks on a related note, given that there will likely be a surge in students eager to engage in international exchanges in the coming years, how do you think this could alter the selection or admissions process for American higher education institutions? Is there an ideal international student? And perhaps sort of tying the domestic and the foreign a little bit here in the last part of the question, how will this be affected by recent pushes back on affirmative action processes within US higher education?
These are great questions, and Alistair, you're a great moderator. I appreciate that. I think we all have to realize that admissions at US higher education is going to change in this decade. And just think about a decade before, it was rare for a college or university to say, you don't have to take a standardized test. By the end of this decade, it'll be rare to have any left that say you have to take a standardized test. That our courts will review what we call affirmative action, and what is the freedom of universities to say we can take a whole range of criteria into account in doing admissions. So I think we're on the edge of some real change. I can't predict what it's going to be. And I think it is really going to be difficult and challenging to be in the surge period, to be an admissions officer, because you're going to have more files to read. You're going to have more people from countries, especially international students, that you always said you'd like to have more people from. And suddenly they've applied to your institution, maybe a lot of them. And the university itself is going to have to realize in its strategic plan and its foreign policy how intentional they want to be, or how you staff up an admissions office that is reading not 10,000 files, but 50,000 files. And none of us know the answers to that yet. What we do embrace and should embrace is the opportunity that especially US higher education has to take more students. At the 5-6 years ago, there were 20 million American citizens in higher education. They're now 17 million. There are 3 million more spaces. Last year, we had 914,000 international students. So the previous 5 years, it was over 1 million. I think by this fall, we'll be back over 1 million. That's only 4% of the seats in American higher education. And in other countries, it's much higher. Don't we have enough seats to have 2 million international students here? Wouldn't we benefit from that without taking anything away from an American? I think we're going to have to confront those issues, but there are very few countries beyond the United States that could double the number of international students without severely straining the infrastructure of the university. We're blessed with so many accredited colleges and universities that there are so many seats that could be filled, and the challenge for a university administration and the admissions office is to figure out how to do that.
And it seems to me, talking with admissions officers here at Georgetown, the other factor is how do you evaluate students who've had a very interrupted experience of high school and college because of the pandemic, and how do you factor that in addition to the increased number of applicants? How do you factor in those more disjointed experiences or resume gaps because of the pandemic is also a question for the coming years. There's some
I think we've learned a lot from taking in the Syrian refugee and displaced students. We're learning a lot now with Afghanistan. And we're learning that a student that gets reconnected to their higher education almost always thrives. They excel. They take enormous advantage of what opportunity they suddenly have been given. That's been our experience universally with all of the Odyssey scholars. It was our experience universally with all of the Syrian refugee and displaced students we were able to arrange placement for. And I think our universities were surprised at how resilient refugee students are and how you can be reconnected to your higher education. Maybe the last time you were in a classroom was 10 years before that. And yes, you're an adult student, but you're a better student. You're taking full advantage of it. And so the disconnection wasn't a deterrence to having students in this situation thrive. And I think that's been the refugee student experience. And I think it will be the refugee student experience the more we open our doors.
There's plenty of fantastic questions that have come in. There's two big groups of questions that I'd like to address. One is about virtual exchange and innovative formats of exchange. But first, I want to make sure we talk a little bit about the excellent video that you presented and some of the questions that brought up. So there's a question here from Nicole Hallett. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And she asks, given the political and social climate currently in the United States, in particular racial and religious tensions, coupled with the welcoming social climate, favorable tuition policies, highly ranked institutions in countries like Norway, how can the US continue to compete as a top destination for international students?
When it comes to international education, the US is represented by its colleges and universities. They exist in every single state of the Union. Yes, politics are different and tensions are different from different places, but we have a reputation internationally of open academic doors and welcoming campuses. And it really, in many ways, that's the best lesson you can get out of this experience about America. Yes, like all countries, we have tensions and problems and incidents and violence. But the internationally mobile student gets to know us beyond those headlines. Also teaches Americans that maybe never have met a Muslim before or never have been to their country about what life is like in their country and discover we have common aspirations and common challenges and common problems. So I think the beauty of international education is that it can get behind the headlines. It can get behind the bad news so that people develop a real sense of who we are, what our values are, and we get an equal opportunity to sense who they are and what their values are. And it's a little different than competing with each other in the Olympics. I'm sure the Olympics are just fine, wonderful bonding things, but it's not the same as being a student and having the discussions that students and faculty have. It's not the same as being on a college campus, realizing that there's real issues about freedom of speech, real issues about race, and we figure out ways to talk about them. You don't do that at the Olympics. You don't do that if you're just going for an international job someplace. This period of higher education is the place where you can do that, where you have the chance to do it. And it's not invented, it's natural. And that's why I think it will be such a powerful force for mutual understanding in the future.
Thank you. And another realm where perhaps there's possibilities for greater exchange and new formats is, of course, in the virtual realm. And there's a couple of questions about that. One is from Sherilyn Harrington, who I think is one of Dr. Long's students as well, asking about that generally, the future of international online and distance learning, and relatedly, an emerging market perhaps in international education for non-traditional students, perhaps being able to participate online at lower cost, or in this case, Sherilyn mentioned students with disabilities, those who were parenting while being students. So a general comment on online exchange would be really helpful, I think. And then Norman Goodman, Public Diplomacy Association of America, former Voice of America and IIE as well. He asked sort of a specific version of that question, where he says, we're also on the verge of the metaverse, which will enable us to meet in virtual reality. How much will this impact the future of international educational exchange? So I suppose this is a prediction question about what impact the metaverse will have on those exchanges.
Well, I think Norm and I are both really happy to know that we're not going to be replaced by robots, and we're not going to be wearing, and Kyle, I don't think in our courses in the future, we're going to be wearing virtual reality goggles and talking to people who may be virtual, may not be, you don't know. I have been worried before the pandemic that distance learning, online, virtual, would transform what happens on a college campus. What I think I've learned through the pandemic is that the faculty hate distance learning, the students hate distance learning. Nobody is happy not going to class. Nobody is happy being holed up in their dorm room, dialing into what would be a class, even though it's only a few hundred feet away. There is something about proximity to each other, and something about the model of the academy that will transcend this craze for digitalization. So it's not going to put what we know as higher education or exchanges out of business. It'll be a bit more efficient. We find we have almost 100% attendance at pre-departure orientations because, for example, it's convenient and easy to do online. And yes, it's nice to see people in person, but if you can reach more people with the basic information, it will be more useful. I think I can envision when we send students to study abroad, instead of saying, you might want to see a movie about the place you're going, there could be some virtual reality that says, this is what it's like when you get off at the airport, when you get off your plane, this is how you go into the city, this is how you find a place to live. That will help some, but the basic model of what we do is not going to be replaced by this. Now, the next thing I'm going to say might suggest just the complete opposite. There is something called the University of the People. It's entirely online. It's entirely free. It's entirely accredited. Its board is chaired by former university presidents. And it is designed for refugee and displaced students and students who cannot afford, for whatever reason, to pay any tuition or to show up in a classroom because they're raising a family, they have other jobs. It was an experiment 10 years ago. I think it had maybe 1,000, 1,500 students. I've met some of them. They do very well. They get jobs. They're very inspiring. Last year, their enrollment exceeded 110 with 94,000 students from other countries or outside the United States. There's plenty of room in the universe we're talking about for both. There's plenty of need for both. In fact, you can do a university of the people undergraduate degree and then go to a 2-year or 3-year graduate program that is on campus where you get a scholarship because you'll still need the scholarship. And I'm not worried about having both options available. I'm worried about not addressing enough of the refugee and displaced students, the students of limited means, the students who can't attend college and university as we know it, because I don't want them to be the lost generation either. And we know how to teach. We know that education works. It's not like we have to invent a vaccine or a cure for the pandemic of a lost generation. It's education. It's there. And it will come in the familiar form and it will come in the virtual form. And both are okay for me.
We have so many questions still. I don't think we'll have time to get to all of them. We'll definitely make a note of them and perhaps we can find a way of continuing the conversation afterwards. A question from—
I can make that very easy. My personal email is the same as IIE's email. So it's Goodman, all one word, at iie.org. I try to answer all the emails I get every day. So welcome any of your questions.
Well, that's very kind of you. And we'll make sure that members of the audience have the chance to do that. I did just want to make sure I asked Ambassador Brian Carlson's question. He's the membership chair at PDC. When you speak to members of Congress, both senators and representatives, or governors and state legislatures, what arguments or lines of information do you find most effective in gaining their support for all of these programs you've talked to us about it today? He mentions Fulbright specifically. What are the criticisms or counter arguments you find especially hard to refute?
I don't find we get arguments against Fulbright or educational exchange or keeping our doors open, whether it's red states or blue states, governors, mayors, and Congress to a person. And we try to visit all of the members of the Appropriations Committee over the course of a year. So that's 85 members of the Senate and the House. They all get what international education and public diplomacy is about and does. And thanks to the Congress, there's a 75-year-old track record when it comes to the Fulbright program. People understand what Fulbright does, regardless of their party. They support it, regardless of other political issues that divide people. And it is so central to the way our political leaders think about what education does and what it can do for our place in the world, that I don't get the arguments. I'm sure there are arguments against it. I don't hear them. People don't close their door when we come around and say, I'd like to talk to you about Fulbright or Gilman, because they know somebody that had a Fulbright or a Gilman. They've met somebody about they've negotiated a hard issue with somebody that went to school in America, breaks the ice. So I think we're onto something here that is quintessentially in many ways American. And it didn't start out that way. Our system of higher education is 450 years old. International education was roundly opposed for about 350 of those years. So it's a very recent phenomenon, but I was struck the moment we opened our doors. Two things happened in 2020. One, we found a way to open the doors, as I mentioned, through the visa process. The other is we surpassed two countries that had been the leading hosts of international students for the preceding 500 years, Britain and Germany. And we've never looked back. We are the leading destination country. We will remain the leading destination country. And I think that is because it is part of how we see how our place in the world includes universities and their foreign policies.
Thank you. And thank you for that historical context that I think really helped situate your comments for us today. I think it's time for me to hand this over to Joel Fishman to wrap up the program. And thanks to all of you. And sorry we didn't get to all of your questions, but Dr. Goodman very kindly agreed to do his best to answer those over email. So hopefully that's a way to kind of continue the conversation. But Joel, thanks, and over to you.
Thank you, Alistair. And Allan, thank you. Thank you very much. I'm Joel Fishman, president of the Public Diplomacy Association of America. Join us next month when the March 7 First Monday will feature Thomas Carruthers, Senior Vice President for Studies at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Carruthers is a leading authority on international support for democracy, human rights, governance, rule of law, and civil society. He has accomplished extensive democratic assistance and field research on aid efforts around the world. And he was chosen to moderate the discussion panel on countering digital authoritarianism for the 2021 White House Virtual Summit on Democracy. Reversing today's authoritarian trend is a challenge for public diplomacy, complicated by the fact that the resilience of our own democracy is being questioned, both abroad and here at home. Do we have a hopeful message? Will anyone listen? These are the questions we'll address 4 weeks from today at the March 7 First Monday. See you then.